set in the country of kangaroos, namely Australia. The story begins by introducing an American journalist named Pet, spelled Pete, who has just arrived at a remote place which is the location of the Wildlife Reaper cruise, or a kind of wildlife river cruise tourist spot where Pet and several tourists will also take a trip or journey led by a wildlife expert named Cat, who has a dog who also joins the trip.
Anyone have any questions?
Tourists themselves are various jungles. There are families consisting of children, fathers, and mothers who intend to go on vacation. There are solo women who just want to enjoy nature. While men could do, there are married couples who are on their honeymoon. There is a photographer who shows off his DSLR camera. And there is also a father who scattered the ashes of his recently deceased wife, so that this tour became a kind of meditation for them. They could enjoy the pleasure of being grateful for the blessings and beauty of nature that God created on their way. They stopped to see some tourists who were feeding a crocodile that turned out to be able to jump high, so that one tourist asked Keck about whether they were safe on the boat. Cat answered that crocodiles live more often in water, so as long as they don't go into the water, then the crocodiles won't be dangerous. In fact, what's dangerous is the crocodile that lives on land has a high lust for fresh prey.
Oh my God.
You'll be right, so long as you don't go in the water.
I guess that's how they catch.
When they were enjoying nature, that's when two men in Julian clothes approached the boat. They were the animal guards at this place, one of whom was named Neil, who, of course, had often met Cot and even knew him well. Neil, who was joking around, tried to tease Cat in front of the tourists so that Pet and his friends immediately defended him until Delta deliberately fell into the water after Cat managed to trick him.
Sorry about that, folks.
Bali entered the calm river area, which was between high cliffs. One of the tourists tried to immortalize the moment by recording it, which coincidentally saw a sound in the distance, which after the second sound appeared and they all saw it, it was certain that there was someone who was in need of help.
There's one.
All right, we've just seen what looks like...
No, well, I'm not having you out here all day.
This is where a little debate occurred when the armpit wanted to go to the source of the sound while the tourists wanted to go home straight away, because they already had their own schedules, such as plane departure schedules, dinner schedules, and their own personal affairs. But it seems that the cat is still clean, hard, wanting to go check without thinking that these tourists are his responsibility, who must be taken home safely.
But after being persuaded to only go for a while, the pet and his fellow tourist were willing to follow. What this music was, the path they were taking, began to be quiet and narrow, so that we finally realized that this point was a sacred place that was rarely passed by tourists in Marapa. A few hours passed, and the time showed 5:30 in the afternoon, which would soon be dark. They looked really far from the trip route they should have, and started entering the swamps. Cat, who was responsible in this situation, was still optimistic about finding the person who found the beacon, which was not long after there was a boat that had been overturned, so it was certain that the person on the boat was the one who had fired his voice. Who knows where the person is? But Keaton's friends, who were still watching it, were suddenly surprised by a crocodile.
Okay, we should...
Saw a small island near them to immediately speed his boat to the island, so that, in the end, Cat and the tourists had to be trapped here and it was impossible to go home with the condition of the boat that was already leaking badly. They tried to find a means of communication, but it didn't work because it was submerged in water. Likewise, with the cell phone signal, there was no signal at all due to the remote location they were currently in.
Well, how will anyone know where we are?
Can't sit on this pile of mud waiting to go underwater.
With the fact that it was getting dark and the high tide would drown this small island, the mustachioed man had the idea for them all to swim to land. One of the tourists, who was the husband of the woman with glasses, tried to prevent him, right when the photographer got a response from the radio. But suddenly,
I can hear something.
the man disappeared, and a moment after being attacked by the same crocodile, the woman with glasses was calmed down by several female tourists so that she could let go of her husband. While Pet was still trying to find a signal, but couldn't. Finally, he helped Cat, who was looking for a flare gun in the boat, which turned out to be the sound in a floating box on the water, far from their current position.
A box with the word flares written on the side of it?
We're in the middle of nowhere
So we
here.
have to stay calm.
Explaining that this place is the crocodile's territorial area, so that they are all officially the crocodile's prey that will not give up until they get them all. Who, with all that he knows, should have thought that he was the main cause of this happening and was fully responsible for the safety of all tourists.
Somebody do something!
When he was confused, that's when he and one of his friends came laughing, without knowing what had just happened. Neil managed to survive, while his friend had disappeared and must have become the crocodile's meal. And all that was left on the water were 2 dead Muscovy ducks that were originally intended to feed the crocodiles in this river.
Colin!
Long story short, even at night, can be imagined how restless and anxious these tourists must be in a place and situation like this. With the fact that the river water had started to rise and would drown this small island, Neil finally had the idea to take the tourists to the mainland by climbing the rope that he would tie on the other end of the island.
One of those trees to one of those trees over there. We suspend it.
The problem is, there must be someone who is willing to swim there first, because Neil is the person who knows this place best. She dared to do that for everyone's safety, capitalizing on the center rope and swimming skills that are not too good. Very Nalphone managed to reach the mainland safely, immediately tied the rope to a rather old tree, stretched it hard enough so that they could all reach the mainland without having to break or enter the water. The distance from the island to the mainland is actually not too far, but because some of these tourists can't swim, and even if they swim and do it for a long time, it is likely to provoke the crocodile to come and ambush them all. Assisted by tourists other than the woman with glasses, whose husband had died, he would also go first, according to the woman's instructions. He crawled slowly with a mediocre technique. When he had reached halfway, the woman with glasses complained of fatigue and couldn't stand having to crawl anymore, even though Kat and her friends had tried to encourage her, so that the father, who had a daughter, felt impatient, which in the end, he and his child also crawled, right when the woman with glasses was still hanging in the middle.
I am not Pingling! Stay away from me!
At this moment, I personally also got annoyed when the mother with glasses whined, tired, even though she was only a few steps away from the mainland, where at this time, she was going to help, her flashlight accidentally fell. And after Niall became the next victim. Another problem arose when the rope and tree used were unable to support the weight of 3 people, so that the 3 of them had to fall straight into the water. But luckily, the crocodile was busy taking care of the signal. They managed to get back to the island. As a result, the number of victims has now increased because of the uncle, aka the father of this beautiful girl, where when Kat was about to pull him from the water, Suddenly, right in front of his own daughter and wife's eyes, the uncle was thrown and torn to pieces and then taken away by the crocodile to be stored in a secret place, which was his food storage place. The photographer himself accidentally found a box containing a carton of alcoholic drinks, where he was the type of person who, when drunk, would increase his intelligence by giving a brilliant idea by keeping the crocodile busy using 2 Muscovy ducks, so that when the crocodile was busy, it would give the tourists time to swim to the mainland.
If it doesn't.
After the tourists were saved, it was Pet and Cat's turn, who were still on Path Island, who were still busy holding the crocodile's fishing rod, and were suddenly surprised by the crocodile suddenly disappeared, just as the paint had just entered the water, so that in the middle of an urgent situation like that, Pet intended to help him, but it seemed that Cetus was too late. Leaving Pet and his dog the cat, he shouted, looking for other tourists who had run far away, maybe from this place. Selfish indeed, but reasonable for the safety of their respective families. Suddenly his dog ran into a cave, which turned out to be the nest of the giant crocodile, which was proven when there were so many bodies of victims scattered with bodies that had been torn to pieces. Pet managed to find Cat and make sure he was still alive, even though he had suffered quite serious injuries. When Pet was about to carry him out of Serang, the crocodile suddenly appeared to eat all the prey he had caught. Hiding the paint in a safe place that was difficult for the crocodile to reach, while he himself was seen sitting leaning behind the door, which, with the capital of a wooden blade with a sharp tip, the crocodile dragged him to attack, but unexpectedly, Pet, the news journalist, managed to kill the crocodile. After everything was finished, the medical team and assistants came and were brought by the medical team, while the tourists who survived had already been there, evacuated, so that from this incident the Pet can take wisdom and lessons that vacationing to extreme places and far from civilization is a bad idea. This incident had become viral news at that time, with the narrative of a tourist who managed to kill a ferocious crocodile, where the Pet himself was reported to have died 2 days after the incident because he accidentally saw a cockroach which, because he was shocked, he fell backwards and his head hit the handle of the thermos quite hard, which finally made him have a concussion and died, meeting his death.